Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Unleash Opportunity webinar. So we are here today to talk about how to conduct solid wood due diligence in timber value chains and what are the challenges and opportunities in doing so. A very timely and interesting topic indeed. So I'm very happy to see that nearly 140 participants registered for today's webinar. So my sincere thanks to each one of you. Next slide, please. My name is Cathy Roussel, and I'm part of amfori's advocacy team, and I will be your moderator today. But what would be a moderator without great speakers? So let me introduce you our four panelists today. So we will start with Florence Sarrazin, our environmental expert in amfori advocacy team, setting the scene for today's discussions. She will be looking at the growing number of policy initiatives to target the deforestation issue, and she will provide some intelligence on where this may lead us in the future. Florence will be followed by Sarah Hickman, Deputy Director of NetColumn Solutions. Sarah has 10 years of experience in responsible sourcing of forest impact commodities, and she will present you the EU Timber Regulation and cast some light on the complexity of the system that businesses need to put in place to respect their obligations. She will be followed by Eric Gravier. So Eric is our amfori environment and chemical lead, and Eric will be giving us a presentation on the Timber Due Diligence tool that was launched by amfori early this year, and that will certainly provide excellent support and practical solutions to our amfori members in their due diligence journey. And last but not least, we will have an amfori member, Oscar de Frias, CSR manager for Corte Inglés, one of the largest retailing groups in Spain. Oscar has been with Corte Inglés for 15 years, holding various positions in its sourcing offices around Asia. He will be sharing his experience in raising awareness and understanding of staff and suppliers of the timber due diligence requirements, so that these can actually be translated into practice. Next slide, please. So here you can see a detailed agenda for our webinar this morning. Next slide. Finally, a bit of housekeeping before we start. So to avoid sound issues, all participants will be muted and camera will be off for the duration of the webinar. But to make this webinar as interactive as possible, I would recommend that you share your questions or comments during the course of the webinar. So you can use the question box and indicate towards which speaker you would like your questions to be directed. And we will do our best to respond to these questions after our speaker's intervention. So speaking about time, we only have an hour to spend together. So without further ado, I'm now giving the floor to our first speaker, Florence Sarrazin. Florence, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Cathy, and good morning, everyone. So my name is Florence Sarrazin, and I'm in Cathy's team. I'm working on environmental topics for advocacy. And today I'm here to draw for you the landscape of the EU policy in 2020 on timber due diligence. I invite you to check out our advocacy agenda for 2024 on amfori's website if you want to learn more on the topics that we're working on. So I would like to start with a slide about FLEGT. Next slide, please. So FLEGT stands for Forest Law Enforcement, Governance and Trade. It's an action plan containing a set of measures aiming at tackling illegal logging in the world's forests. The 7 measures, when they're taken together, they not only prevent important importation of illegal logging, but they also increase the demand for responsibly logged timber. And the EU Timber Regulation is one of the measures that are adopted as part of the action plan. So the first measure of the action plan is to provide financial and technical support to timber produced countries. There's a second measure that aims to promote trade and legal timber and timber products in other markets such as Japan, the US, Australia, and China. This measure also includes voluntary partnership agreements with sourcing countries where they negotiate on and help the sourcing countries on strengthening the governance. There's a third measure that aims at public procurement policies in the EU to ensure that they are socially and environmentally beneficial. There's a measure also focusing on financial and technical support for FLECT, for private initiatives, sorry. There's also a measure on for investors.
Sorry to interrupt, but the sound is really bad.
Oh, okay. Should I speak slowly, or is it better like that?
Florence, I could hear you fine. I wonder if it's connectivity with you, Kathy, because you were quite broken when you were speaking towards the end.
Okay, because I see that some others were also commenting on the sound, so maybe it's from our end. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay, so just in case, I'll speak more slowly, and please interrupt me again if it's really not clear. So we've got a measure also tackling conflict timber. And then the final measure is then measure number 6, using existing or new legislation. And it's in this one that the EU Timber Regulation is part of, and it aims at prohibiting the placing of illegal harvested timber on the EU market for both imported and domestically produced timber and timber products. Next slide, please. So the requirement for the companies to perform their due diligence is stated in the EU Timber Regulation. The regulation sets out procedures to minimize the risk of illegal wood entering the EU market, and business in placing a timber product on the EU market must make every effort to ensure that the timber is legally sourced. By restricting the market access of illegal timber and timber products, the EUTR contributes to reducing illegal logging. So it's in force since 2013, and since then, the competent authorities of the member states have gradually increased their capacity and their collaboration, and enforcement is getting stronger every year. However, the first review of the EUTR in 2016 identified weaknesses in the enforcement of the regulation, and that's mostly because companies find it difficult to understand if their product is in scope of the regulation or not. An impact assessment was conducted in 2016 to assess if the scope could be revised, and this year the Commission is conducting a fitness check of EUTR and FLEGT to see if these regulations are enough, if they're filling their objective, and if they could be improved. Next slide. So, since 2018, the discussion on forest due diligence has continued and evolved. There was a communication in 2019 from the Commission committing to assess additional regulatory and non-regulatory measures for deforestation-free supply chains, and to consider improving company reporting on deforestation and forest degradation. This was confirmed a few months later by the European Green Deal. So since the beginning of 2020, due diligence in supply chains to prevent imported products linked to deforestation has been brought into many other policy discussions. I've put on the slide the European climate law, the biodiversity strategy, the Farm to Fork strategy, but I could also have mentioned, for example, trade with the Trade Commissioner, Mr. Hogan, who mentioned the role that his DG, his department could have on reducing deforestation in the cocoa sector, for example. Next slide, please. So what should we expect now regarding the EU timber regulation and more generally due diligence in the supply chain? Well, there are many indications coming from the EU institutions that new requirements will soon fall upon companies placing timber and timber products on the EU market. The first to mention is probably from EU Justice Commissioner Reynes, who has announced in April his intention to drive a legislative initiative for mandatory due diligence for all companies, covering both human rights and environmental impacts. We have, of course, the 2019 communication of the Commission and the European Green Deal, as mentioned before. And we have also the European Parliament, who's about to discuss the topic with a report on the EU legal framework to halt and reverse EU-driven global deforestation. The draft report was published last week and calls for a mandatory due diligence regulation to halt deforestation in the main commodities driving deforestation, and that includes timber. So on the model of the EU timber regulation, this regulation would subject the access of a product to the EU market to the condition that due diligence has been conducted to prevent deforestation in the supply chain. However, this proposal goes beyond the objective of EUTR because it doesn't only make sure that timber has been produced legally, but it has the proposal also requests proof that the product was sustainably harvested, produced, extracted, and processed. That means that complying with the local laws of logging and the requirements that Sarah is going to explain would no longer be enough, and the environmental and human rights impacts of the supply chain would also fall in the scope. So in order to integrate these broader aspects, the proposal suggests that the company's duties fall under four aspects: due diligence, reporting, disclosure, and third-party participation. So with all these discussions and all these initiatives, the discussion is very much focused on mandatory due diligence requirements to prevent deforestation and in supply chains of products destined to the EU market. Now, it's not been decided yet, it's a discussion, but it's coming from different angles. So for this reason, and also to follow closely the evolution of the EU timber regulation, I'm happy to say that Eric and I are part of the new Commission expert group, both on the implementation of the EU timber regulation and FLEGT regulation, and on the follow-up of the communication of the Commission on protecting and restoring the world's forests. So we'll keep you updated. I just wanted to finish by advising the companies listening today, and especially the ones who are not yet in scope of the EUTR, to look into strengthening their due diligence policies so that you are sure that your companies will be prepared for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Florence. Clearly, there is a lot going on at policy level at the moment, and it's good that we have you on the advocacy team to keep our members informed about future developments. So our next speaker is Sarah Hickman from NetColumn, and she will elaborate on the details of the EUTR legislation and about what obligations this creates for business. Over to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Kathy, for the introduction, and thank you very much for having me on the webinar today. As explained, I'm from NetCon, based in Europe, and we are a not-for-profit organisation that offers support services to the private sector in the responsible sourcing of forest-based commodities. We are particularly active in the timber sector, and we've been working with both the private sector and also we work with project-funded activities. And if I could have the next slide, please. My time here today is actually part of the EU LIFE project that's funding a multi kind of stakeholder activities around raising awareness of the EUTR and how to better support companies in fulfilling their obligations under the EUTR. Please can I have the next slide? Thank you. So the plan today is just to do a fairly whistle-stop tour of the requirements under the EUTR for companies that are defined as operators under the EUTR. So the regulation refers to operators, and those are companies who are legally required to act. I'll go into some of the ins and outs of what companies have to do and just explore some of the key text. So to start with, the three main requirements placed on operators is first of all, it's prohibited from placing illegal timber on the EU market, and then those that are placing timber on the EU market have to have a due diligence system through which they purchase their timber, and that must be maintained and regularly evaluated. So if you want to see the exact kind of text of that, you can refer to Article 4 within the regulation. But today we're going to explore number 2, really, so what a due diligence system looks like. Next slide, please. Oh, I think you might need to click through a few times to get it to appear. So the EUTR is quite helpful in that it does go into some detail as to what a due diligence system should include, and it's sort of, I guess, a bit unusual in some ways compared with other regulations of its type, in that it is quite prescriptive as to what that due diligence system must include. And from sort of where we sit, looking at kind of enforcement action across the EU on operators, it's much more common for an operator to be faced with penalties and fines because their due diligence system does not comply with the regulation, rather than they're found to be actually importing illegal timber. So there's reasons for that. It's much harder to show that material is illegally harvested, but also because of the way the EUTR is worded, it makes it much easier to be able to kind of see where a company isn't complying with the specific due diligence text within the regulation. So let's go into the detail of how the EUTR defines due diligence. So it's considered a due diligence system is defined as a framework of procedures and measures, and it can be further described as a documented, tested, and step-by-step method, including controls aimed at producing consistently desired outcomes within business processes. So that's taken from the EU's guidance on the regulation. So it does really highlight that it does need to be a system, and it does need to be documented, and that it to be kind of a formal process. Quite often we see due diligence being within, it's a set of steps, maybe within someone's head, or it's not formalized necessarily. So just to stress that point. Can I have the next slide, please? So due diligence is further broken down into 3 steps. So we regularly refer to access to information being the first step, and then you will be using that information to conduct a risk assessment, and wherever risk is identified, you are required by the regulation to mitigate that risk. Next slide, please. So the regulation also outlines what information you're obliged to collect to facilitate the due diligence. So you're required to have product type, quantity of product imported, and also your first tier supplier. So looking at that as an operator, that's probably within the scope of normal business practices and not really much extra is required there, you might be thinking, but then when we get on to the last 3 bullet points of species, so you need to know the species within your product, the country of origin, and where applicable, the region or concession of harvest, and then information indicating legal compliance. So this is where we see the challenges for operators come to the fore. And operators are required to keep that information for 5 years. So it's important that this is, you have this on record. Next slide, please. And then, so the level of information, when you think about that last point of information showing compliance, that's really the tricky bit of we get asked how much information is that, what information does that actually entail, and sort of our kind of answer to that question is really the level of information you require is at a level that requires you to do one of these two things, sorry. So a level of information that requires you to conclude that input materials originate from a low risk supply chain, or that any potential risks has been mitigated, or a level of information that effectively allows you to effectively identify the risk and then select a mitigation measure and implement that measure. So if you're not able to do one of those two things, then the chances are the level of information you have is not sufficient. Next slide, please. So the level of information also, it will differ quite significantly depending on the level of risk in your supply chain. So generally, the more riskier your supply chain, the more information you require. And the other key point here is there is no self-standing requirement for documentation, and we often see an over-reliance on documentation, but a company may not necessarily be able to explain why that particular document helps them further address the risk. So how has that document helped you do the risk assessment and mitigate the risk? And if you can't answer that question, then arguably it's sort of, is that document really necessary? What is it helping you do? So documentation is not a self-standing requirement, and we also kind of want to caution against over-reliance on documentation as an information source. Next slide, please. So as part of your access to information, you really do need to map your supply chain, because without mapping and understanding your supply chain, it's not really possible to do a robust risk assessment. So thinking back to the minimum information requirements, the minimum amount of information is that you need to have the country of harvest. So you're mapping to the country of harvest as a minimum in all circumstances, but where risk is present, you're going to need to go further than that. And in reality, actually, in a lot of timber supply chains, there is significant risk, and therefore you will be going further than just the country of origin when mapping your supply chains. And then when we think about the documents you're asking for, really that those documents are there firstly to evidence the supply chain maps that your supplier maybe has provided you with, or your supply chain map, just to give you confidence in that. And then those steps facilitate the risk assessment. Next slide, please. So when we think of risk assessment, what are we risk assessing against? And it's the definition of the EU's definition of what legal timber is. So legal timber, as defined by the EUTR, is legally harvested, is timber harvested in accordance with applicable legislation in the country of harvest. So applicable legislation is quite a kind of broad or vague term. So let's explore that a bit further in the next slide. The EUTR helpfully breaks down what applicable legislation gives a little bit more detail. So it's considered to include legislation relating to legal rights to harvest, payment of harvest rights, timber harvesting activities, third-party rights, so the rights of local communities and indigenous communities, and legislation related to trade and customs insofar as the forest sector is concerned. So I think sometimes it's when operators see that list there of the breadth of kind of applicable legislation that's included within the EUTR, I think often there's a bit of a sharp intake of breath because it is quite a wide-ranging list. Next slide, please. So the objectives of your risk assessment is fourfold. So through the risk assessment, the aim is to evaluate that whether the forest products have been illegally harvested, firstly, and then also whether they've been illegally transported or traded. And then one that sometimes gets overlooked is the risk of mixing within the supply chain, and whether what's in your supply chain or what you think is in your timber supply chain has been mixed with illegal or unknown origin material from unknown origin. And where something is unknown, that's a risk in itself, because if you don't know the species, the country of origin, the risk related to that material, that's a risk in itself, and would be considered a non-compliance under the regulation if there's unknown material in your supply chains. And then finally, the final objective of the risk assessment is to be able to identify the risk to a level that enables you to effectively mitigate that risk. Next slide, please. So we come to the third and final step of the due diligence process, and that is risk mitigation. So the EUTR requires you to mitigate the risk wherever you identify risk. And I think we see a lot of companies preoccupied with the risk assessment process because it is so challenging, but we see fewer companies actually taking kind of proactive steps to mitigate the risk. And this is where we're wanting to encourage companies to really focus their attention. We break down risk into two categories. So we see there's the risk avoidance steps you can be taking, and that they might be prior to actually deciding to purchase a product, the risk avoidance measures are sort of embedded within your due diligence system. So your procedures for buying products are set up in such a way that you are avoiding riskier material. That might be who you choose to be your suppliers, what supply chains, where they're purchasing from. Using certified material is often a key risk avoidance measure, particularly for smaller companies or for retailers who don't necessarily have the weight of being able to effect change in their supply chain as readily as other companies. And then there's the controlling the risk. So risk mitigation measures that may include training your supplier. That might be on training on what information you're required to about your supply chain, or it might be training on something, a particular compliance issue relating to applicable legislation in that country. So if there's health and safety concerns, training around that. So it can be sort of training as broad as it needs to be, really. And then there's more innovative measures that we're seeing being used more and more often, including timber testing. So companies are using that to confirm the species in their material and the origin of their material more and more. And collecting more information in the form of documentation, but also getting on the ground, stakeholder consultation, that sort of thing. So really, when you're building your due diligence system, having procedures in place for escalation of when risk is identified, how then risk mitigation measures might be put in place, we see as really important and not to be overlooked when faced with the when you're trying to battle the challenge of doing risk assessments as well. Next slide, please. So just to finish up, I wanted to show you a slide on our NetColumn Sourcing Hub. This was a tool that was created with the first round of EU funding. So the current activities are within the second round, and this was the Sourcing Hub was built with the first round of funding. So it's been around for a couple of years now, but if you may not be aware of it, it holds country level risk assessments on over 80% of the timber producing countries. So it's a really useful resource for you to use, but there's also tools in there that will help you do your due diligence. So there's document guides, risk mitigation guides, and tools specific to due diligence, so like how to collect information and how to risk assess and these sorts of things. So if you haven't seen it already, I encourage looking at that. It really is a great resource and it's totally free. You don't need to be a NetColumn client to use it. That brings me to the end of my presentation, and I think it's Eric next.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sarah, for this very comprehensive presentation. So let us continue this conversation with another intervention from Eric Graphi, who will introduce you to our new amfori timber due diligence tool.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Sarah. Very pleased to be there with you all today. So I will introduce the timber amfori due diligence tool with 2 free slides, and then I will bring you directly in the platform to be more practical and to deliver some practical answers to you. So next slide, please. So the amfori timber due diligence is delivering 5 key deliverables, because as you understood from Sarah and from Florence, there's a lot of things to do and it's not so easy to get organized and to blend all the data that you will collect. So first, with the amfori timber due diligence, you will be able to collect all the needed information, layer by layer, tier by tier. The second main point is the data collection. So everything will be organized for you, and at the very end of the process, a risk assessment report will be automatically produced for you, product by product and supply chain by supply chain. So you don't have to take care of the production of the drafting of your report. It's a very important part of the regulation, but the platform will do it for you. And one important point also is the report will provide you with an action plan. And I'm echoing the last point of Sarah, which is very important. The due diligence must end up with an action plan. So next slide, please. The principle of the amfori TDD tool compared to some other options in BPI, there's a little bit of change here. You will put pressure on your tier 1. So as I will show you in a few minutes, you will just invite your tier 1 to answer all your questions, and the tier 1 will be in charge of collecting all the needed data. And the tier 1 will have to liaise with the sub-producers, sub-suppliers to complete all the questions and to deliver to you what you expect from him or from her. So in a nutshell, you start the process by assigning the timber due diligence to your tier 1. Then the tier 1 of yours will pick up and will follow up by delivering the data. And the platform will be there to help your tier 1. Next slide, please. So at the very end of the process, as you will see in a few seconds, you will have a complete picture about your value chain. So from the product you are putting on the market or importing and the forest. So it's a real traceability tool, compliant with the EU TR, I would say. And with Napkin and Florence and myself, we are monitoring very frequently the regulation to be sure that the tool is up to date and helping you to comply with the regulation. And at the very end of the process, right part of the slide, the risk assessment will be produced for you, and you will be able to use it to show it to national authorities. We will increase the controls levels, and you will be able to share it with the producers also. So I guess now it's time for me maybe to try to drive you through the amfori BPI platform, just to provide you with more practical answer. So yeah. So this is the amfori BPI platform. So sorry. I will just drive you through quickly the main point. So this is the list. It's a demo platform. It's not the exact real BPI platform, but that's the same, just a demonstration version, a demo version. So this is the list of your suppliers, the list of your producers. So you just have to pick your tier one of your tier one, and to assign with the program assignment box the Timber Due Diligence program. Here you see all the nice and important actions you could assign with BPI, from training to others, environmental assessment, or some other tools. And at the very bottom of it, you can see the amfori Timber Due Diligence. Just by clicking on this box and saving, you will be able to start assigning the task to complete the Timber Due Diligence questionnaire to you. So let's move back to the list of your producers. By clicking on this Timber Due Diligence box, you will activate the Timber Due Diligence column. So what does it mean? It means that you will have the possibility to create your list of products. So this is a virtual list of products. And don't worry, have no fear, because creating a new product is very simple. So let's have a look, for example. As you can see, it's a very short number of questions just to provide a product name and to provide a short description, and also to provide information about already certifications you add or you will add for this product. And I am anticipating maybe one question. So this is where you will mention if you have already some certification in place. And please remember that APC or PFC certificates are not enough to conduct the due diligence. They are very nice piece of information, very well-known supporting documentation, but they are not enough. And you will also mention the due date. By when do you expect the final and complete version of your report? So you will save it, and automatically your producer will receive this kind of alert from the BPI platform to say, hey, you are the tier one of XYZ, and he or she assigned this Timber Due Diligence to you. So please click on the web link to start completing the answer. So let's move back to the list of products. Why it is a nice tool? Because if I would take this example, a wooden chair, the tier one will start by creating components. So the tier one will define and will list all the components. And for all the components, he or she will complete all the information. So at the end of the process, you will have a clear list of all the components, all the supply chain, because you may have different supply chains for the same components, as mentioned by Sarah. And then he or she will go down the forest level. And for each and every single layer, the list of questions is adapted to the role of the player. If it is an importer, he or she will have a specific list of questions. If it is a forest responsible, it will be another one. So when everything will be completed at supply chain level, it could be submitted for review to you. Then everything will be completed at, let's say, component level. Let's say like for this one, the floorboard, you will see that you could easily mark it as complete or reject it, because maybe you will define that some gaps are there and you need more information, and by rejecting you will ask the producer to go back to his or her work and to provide you with more information. And when all the components will be completed, let's have another example. This product too, you could mark it as completed forever, and then would be nice, because then the platform will start blending the information and will deliver to you a risk assessment report. And the assessment report, you have two versions, the extended one or the short one. The short one is this one. So you will find all the information about the risk factors and all the key points for you to tackle. And with the extended view, clearly you will have in addition the very nice piece, which is the risk explanation and the action plan to go through it and to implement, for example, some checking measures or so safety measures. I guess I'm reaching the end of my part. I would like just to pinpoint two things. BPI is a very flexible tool. So you don't have to follow the usual process of BPI. So if you know that you want to work on the timber, don't waste time in assigning the ACQ. Go directly to the program assignment and go for the timber due diligence. Go for the straight point. And one key message for you all, do remind that the use of BPI is free for your producers. So as for amfori and for NetColumn, we are providing you tools free of charge for your producers. Very last point before the next presentation. At the end of the workshop, you will receive a lot of content, but with Sarah, we will share with you a web link to a small survey to help you assessing your maturity and your needs for capacity building regarding the timber due diligence. And building on these answers to this survey, we will be pleased to help you to deliver to you with NetColumn some further trainings or support. So keep in mind that you will have a nice survey to complete to provide us with your needs, and also to nicely assess your maturity degree and how well you are prepared. And it's part of this EU Life project.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you. So I'm sure all our members are very excited now about the benefits that this new tool will bring them. So I would now like to introduce our last speaker, Oscar de Freitas from Corte Inglés, who will share with us his experience in developing capacity building initiatives with staff and suppliers. So Oscar, the floor is yours.
Okay, hello, good morning to everybody. Thank you, amfori, for inviting me to this seminar to share with you all the experiences of our company, training our suppliers and setting up a due diligence system. So, as you may know, we are El Corte Inglés. We are a Spanish retailer based in Spain and Portugal. We mainly operate department stores and hypermarkets, and we are importing furniture, some wooden products, and some stationery from Asia. So, therefore, we have the condition of an operator according to the UTR. So in order to comply with the UTR, I don't know if you can share the slides with the key points. I mean, the next one. So well, when possible, you can share the next slides. So the first thing we did in our company, the starting point is see if our company was prepared internally to set up the timber due diligence system. We have the team. So although we are a large company, we have a legal team, we have also environmental team. At the end, because all these matters are very technical regarding the wood, we decided that we needed a partner to set up the timber due diligence system. So our company in Spain decided to appoint NetColumn. NetColumn, as we have seen from Sarah, is a very experienced company in the field of forestry and timber. They also have the condition of monitoring organization for UTR as per the European Union or European Commission. So they have global coverage. They have staff, expertise in all around the world, so they can offer us guidance for any particular matter. So the first thing we did with NetColumn was an internal training with the staff of El Corte Inglés. Although we are operating mainly in Spain and Portugal, we have also sourcing offices in Asia. So we have staff, merchandising teams helping us sourcing and buying all these products. So the first thing was training them about the UTR, what is a timber due diligence system, so they know what is necessary to ask the suppliers, what are the documents, how we can mitigate the risk, and they also help us NetColumn with some practical cases. So we see not only the theory, but how to check a document issued in China, transport document, an invoice. So they help us a lot. So after doing these trainings, we do a pilot with BPI, because it's so good that amfori and BPI, they have this program, TDD, Timber Due Diligence. So it's the perfect tool for registering all the information from the suppliers and all the documents. And at the end, like Eric said, we can have a risk assessment. So we did some pilots, so we knew how the suppliers were getting used to it, also our staff using BPI. So we have some experience. So after these pilots, the next step, the crucial one, was to do a supplier training. So it was like the way for us to announce all the suppliers that from now on they will have to start using BPI and TDD and start building their own due diligence system. So they request the information and all the documents from their traders, from the forest they get the wood from. And it was also a good moment because we can interact with the suppliers, they can ask questions, we can resolve their guides. And after the training, also it was the training was online, so because it was very convenient with these times with coronavirus confinement all around the world and many parts of Asia, so it was perfect to reach all the suppliers. So we have webinars in China with Chinese suppliers in Chinese language. We have also webinars for the rest of the suppliers in Asia in English. So after that, we passed to them some materials, because apart from giving a webinar and explaining the things to the supplier, we need to give a quick document so they can easily see what they have to provide. If it's a list of species, if it's a plywood or MDF board, or if they need to provide the transaction documents or the logging permits. So depending on the origin of the goods, the material, if it's certified the supply chain, they know how to, what are the documents they need to source.
Hi, Oscar. Sorry to interrupt you. Just have a few seconds left before, otherwise
yes.
we'll have time to
I'm about to finish. I'm about to finish. Don't worry. So after providing these guides to the suppliers, we have started to do some pilots with all the suppliers. So we have to take advantage that they have everything in their mind with the webinar, with the guides, so they get more familiar with them. And I also like to highlight that it's important to update the knowledge of amfori participants, amfori members, our factories, business partners about all the UTR and TDD by means of webinars, seminars, or the amfori Academy. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Oscar. So now is the moment to open the floor to questions. And looking at the timing, we have only like 7 minutes left to do that. So I'll try to look at the questions and allocate them to the relevant speakers. So if for some time reason your questions cannot be answered today, I just wanted to inform you that we will be collecting all questions and create an FAQ document that will be made available together with the recording of today's event on the Unleash Opportunity website. So let me see, maybe one question, the first question to Eric. There are several questions about FSC and PEFC certified products. So Eric, the first question is, what is the added value of the BPI Timber Due Diligence platform when products are already FSC or PEFC certified?
Okay, so to go to the point, certificates are covering part or the whole of your value chain, but they are providing very key information for your due diligence, but not all the needed answers. A second point is you need to be sure that your certificates are covering the exact component and the exact product. So you need to have a very fine traceability, and the Timber tool for amfori is helping you with that. And there's also some legal case against fully certified PFC or FFC because the certificates were fake, and you need to assess the corruption index of your sourcing country. And this is one beauty of the Timber Due Diligence. So these certificates are not enough. I would say they are providing nice piece of information, but not all of them. And if we have a few seconds, maybe Sarah could build on my answer to provide a more complete one.
Sarah, would you like to add anything?
Well, Eric described it quite well. Yeah, I think so. Certification is really helpful, and it can allow you to address risk, but the UTR doesn't give any exception to certified material. So the requirements placed on you to collect information, do the risk assessment, they don't change. You still have to do those things, but certification can help you lower the risk. It can also help you gather some of the information. So if your supply chain is certified, it normally means that the information you're required to gather is more readily available. We can send, there is some guidance material out there on certification, which if you're sending a follow-up pack, maybe we could add something to that. But yeah, generally speaking, it is helpful, but you still need to do certain things. So like Eric said, it's looking at whether whether this certificate applies to your product. Quite often we will see suppliers, they might say, it's easy. Companies can be certified but without supplying certified material, so it's just understanding whether your material that you're purchasing is certified and some checks on that, really.
Thank you, Sarah. I have another question for you. It's about risk assessment. So the question is there a legal requirement that risk assessments must be conducted annually, and who must conduct them?
Yeah, so you're required to risk assess annually, but more often if the supply chain changes. So we say, at least annually. There's no requirements around who conducts the risk assessment. You as operators, as companies, can conduct risk assessments yourselves. But sometimes, you know, where that is a challenging thing to do, sometimes that is outsourced to kind of more timber experts, and that's something NetCon helps companies do. So there isn't any requirement really around who can do a risk assessment. I think it's making sure whoever is doing it internally has got the resources and the training to do it, because it isn't an easy thing to do, or it isn't an easy thing to do well, you should say. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I'm afraid I have another questions for you.
Okay.
So I hope that's okay. So the next question is still about risk assessment, and so it's, how should a risk assessment look like if the timber is originally from Europe but manufactured in Asia?
Right. Yeah. So in that case, if you're importing timber into Europe that's been the product's been manufactured in Asia, but the timber originates from Europe, if you establish that through your supply chain mapping and that is evidenced, you know, and you can say that with confidence, then according to the UTR, you're not the operator then, so you're not required to do a risk assessment. So it's the operator who's required to risk assess, and in that instance, someone else in the supply chain in Europe is the operator. So something I didn't include in my presentation just due to time is that you can be an operator in Europe. So if you're harvesting or purchasing timber within Europe, so if you're the person harvesting the trees, you are the operator. So in that case, the operator sits somewhere in Europe, so you're not legally required to do the risk assessment. But really, you will still need to determine that material is from Europe and have confidence in that, and be able to evidence that.
Thank you, Sarah. There are still a number of questions that we won't have time to answer now, so we will answer to them later, as I indicated, and this will be made available together with the recording of today's webinar. So we are now reaching the end of this webinar, so I'd like to thank all the speakers for their very interesting contribution, and thank you all for your participation. We look forward to seeing you in our next digital talks. So Naomi, Osara, you can now close the webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.